Captain Elise Blackwood had a reputation in the Air Force that preceded her like the sonic boom of her F-35 Lightning II. At 34, she'd mastered the art of being underestimated. Not in the way fighter pilots typically melted into formation, but in the deliberate way female aviators were overlooked despite outflying their male counterparts in every measurable metric. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elise arrived at Falcon Air Base at 0400 hours every morning, 90 minutes before her required check-in, and often remained until midnight, analyzing threat assessments that stretched across 3 continents. Her workstation was nestled in the corner of the Tactical Operations Center, surrounded by flight planning equipment, mission briefing tables, and the constant hum of a military base at war. At 34, Elise possessed the kind of methodical precision that aerial combat operations depended on, but rarely celebrated. She could recite threat detection patterns for every surface-to-air missile system in hostile territory, coordinate mid-air refueling under impossible conditions, and anticipate enemy fighter movements before they appeared on radar. When squadron leaders needed emergency extraction from contested airspace, Elise could plot the course down to the second. When communication systems failed between forward air controllers and strike teams, she already had backup frequencies established before most officers realized there was a problem. But what nobody knew, what Elise carefully concealed beneath her professional demeanor, was that she spent every spare moment studying advanced combat tactics and special warfare protocols. Not the standard flight manuals that every pilot skimmed through during training, but the advanced aerial combat guides, specialized dogfighting techniques, and classified evasion procedures that crossed her desk when coordinating with Special Operations Air Support. She'd committed to memory the operational parameters of every aircraft in their arsenal, from the standard F-16 Fighting Falcons to the specialized AC-130 gunships used for close air support during nighttime operations. This morning began like countless others before it. Elise was analyzing intelligence reports from the Eastern Theater when Colonel Victor Hammond entered the operations center, his polished flight boots clicking against the recently waxed floor. Behind him followed his usual entourage, Major Thomas Grayson, a tactical officer who'd arrived 3 months ago straight from the Air War College, and Captain James Wilson, the colonel's favorite squadron leader who seemingly could do no wrong. "Blackwood," Hammond called out, not bothering to approach her station. "We need those threat analyses for tomorrow's strike mission by 1300 hours. Think you can handle that? Or should I reassign it to someone with actual combat experience?" Elise looked up from her monitor, her expression professionally neutral, despite the familiar sting of his words. "The analyses were completed at 0600, sir. They've been uploaded to the secure server with hard copies placed in your briefing folder. I've included 3 alternative ingress routes accounting for recent SAM deployments and highlighted potential ambush points." Grayson smirked visibly. Always trying to prove something, he muttered loud enough for Elise to hear. "Actually," Elise continued, maintaining her composure, "I noticed a potential security gap in the planned egress for tomorrow's strike. The radar coverage in the mountain pass creates a 15-minute window where our aircraft will be highly vulnerable. If we adjust departure times or position electronic warfare support at these coordinates, we can maintain a safer corridor." Hammond's jaw tightened noticeably. He didn't appreciate being corrected, especially not by a female pilot who'd been relegated to support duties after filing complaints about sexist treatment in her previous squadron. "I'll be the judge of what requires adjustment, Blackwood. Just stick to your analyses and leave tactical decisions to pilots who've actually seen aerial combat." Elise saved her work and stood up, retrieving a folder from her filing cabinet. She placed it on her desk and opened it deliberately. "Sir, I've cross-referenced recent intercept patterns with the electronic signature profiles along all proposed routes. The data suggests a high probability of enough." "Blackwood," Hammond's voice cut through the operations center like a missile launch. "You're an analyst now, not a combat pilot. You evaluate threats and identify patterns. You don't make tactical assessments about combat operations. That's why you're stuck behind that desk instead of leading strike packages with real pilots." The operations center fell silent except for the steady beep of radar equipment and the distant rumble of aircraft taking off. Wilson shifted his weight uncomfortably, and even Grayson seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. Elise closed the folder slowly, her fingers steady despite the heat rising in her face. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. As Hammond and his followers left, Elise remained standing at her desk, staring at the closed folder. Inside were copies of every combat certification she'd ever earned, every advanced tactical training module she'd completed in her free time, every marksmanship record she'd set in the simulator when nobody was watching. Also tucked away was a transfer request she'd received 2 weeks ago. A request with Joint Special Operations Command letterhead that Hammond knew nothing about. Elise had been invisible for 5 years. But invisibility came with unexpected advantages. People didn't notice when you stayed after hours to use the advanced flight simulators. They didn't question why you volunteered for every electronic warfare qualification that came through the base, and they certainly didn't expect you to have connections that extended far beyond your immediate chain of command. She sat back down at her station and reopened the intelligence reports. Then, almost as an afterthought, she opened a secure communication channel and began typing a message to Colonel Sarah Reynolds at Joint Special Operations Command. The subject line read, "Assessment complete, ready for extraction." Elise had spent 5 years learning to be invisible within the system. Now, it was time to disappear completely and reappear precisely where no one expected her to be. 2 days after the confrontation in the operations center, Elise arrived at work to find her security credentials had been downgraded. She stood at the entrance to the tactical planning section, watching as her access card triggered a red denial light on the scanner. A line of intelligence officers waited behind her, their morning briefings delayed as she repeatedly swiped the card that had worked flawlessly for 5 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Having problems, Blackwood? Major Grayson appeared beside her, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Maybe you should try the general administrative area. You know, where the support personnel belong." Elise stepped aside, allowing Grayson to swipe his own credentials. The door unlocked immediately with an affirmative beep. "There must be a system error," Elise said evenly. "I'll check with security." "Oh, there's no error," Grayson replied, holding the door open but pointedly blocking Elise's path. "Colonel Hammond implemented new security protocols yesterday. Apparently, there were concerns about non-essential personnel accessing sensitive operational information." The officers waiting behind them exchanged uncomfortable glances. Master Sergeant Robert Chen, a 20-year veteran who had worked with Elise on countless mission support operations, stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, Captain Blackwood has clearance for this area. She coordinates all our electronic countermeasures and has access to new protocols." "Chen," Grayson interrupted sharply. "Take it up with the colonel if you have issues with proper security measures." Elise watched Grayson disappear into the restricted area, then turned to Chen. "It's fine, Sergeant. I'll sort this out." But as Elise walked across the base toward the administration building, she noticed other changes. The keypad codes to the advanced simulator facilities had been changed. Her regular station in the operations center had been reassigned to a junior analyst. Her name had been removed from the mission briefing distribution list posted in the main corridor. In the administration office, Elise found herself sitting across from Major Daniel Foster, the base's personnel officer. Foster looked distinctly uncomfortable as he reviewed her file on his tablet. "I'm sorry, Captain Blackwood." The access restriction came directly from Colonel Hammond. He cited operational security concerns. "Major, I've maintained top-secret clearance for 5 years without incident. My record is spotless." "What specific security concern?" "He didn't specify," Foster said quickly, avoiding her gaze. "But he did mention that your recent behavior has been concerning. Apparently, you've been overstepping your assigned duties and attempting to influence operational decisions." Elise felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What decisions?" Foster consulted his notes. questioning established flight paths, attempting to override tactical assessments, challenging command decisions in front of subordinates. He looked up at her with what might have been sympathy. "Look, Elise, I've known you since you arrived at Falcon. This doesn't sound like you, but Hammond is building a case that you're becoming disruptive to unit cohesion." "Disruptive for doing my job?" "For doing more than your job," Foster corrected, "for acting like you're qualified to make decisions that are above your position and experience level." Elise left the administration building with her access temporarily restored to basic levels, but the message was unmistakable: stay in your lane or lose your position entirely. As she walked back toward her reassigned workspace in the general administrative area, she passed the flight line where Wilson was leading a pre-mission briefing. He nodded to her briefly, seemingly oblivious to the targeted campaign building against her. That evening, Elise stayed late again, but this time she wasn't alone. Master Sergeant Chen found her in the nearly empty mess hall at 2100 hours, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Blackwood, what's really happening here?" Chen asked, settling into the seat across from her. "Hammond has been asking questions about your work patterns, your access history, even your training records. I've never seen him target someone like this. I think he wants me gone, Chief." "Why?" "You're the most effective tactical analyst this base has. Half our successful missions in the past year wouldn't have happened without your intelligence assessments." Elise studied Chen carefully. He represented the old guard of the military, someone who valued competence over politics and results over appearances. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Shoot." "If someone hypothetically had all the qualifications for combat operations, all the training, all the certifications, but was blocked from flight assignments because of politics or preconceptions, what would you advise them to do?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug slowly between weathered hands. "Hypothetically, I'd say that person should remember that the Air Force is bigger than any one base and bigger than any one commanding officer. Sometimes you have to navigate around obstacles instead of confronting them directly, even if it means career suicide." Chen paused, then Rivera's voice softened. "Some things are worth the risk, and some people are meant to be in the fight whether or not their current assignment reflects that reality." After Chen left, Elise opened her secure tablet and composed a message to Colonel Reynolds: "Situation accelerating. Request immediate transfer activation." The response arrived within 30 minutes, "Request confirmed. Report to Nellis AFB 0600 Monday for final assessment. New assignment begins immediately upon qualification." Elise printed the message, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her pocket. Tomorrow she would submit a formal transfer request to Joint Special Operations Command. She would follow proper channels and document everything meticulously. But tonight, she had one more message to send. This one went directly to General Alexandra Winters, the regional commander and Hammond's superior. The subject line read, "Request for formal review of systemic discrimination and safety concerns at Falcon Air Base." Elise had been playing defense for 5 years. Now it was time to go on the offensive. The meeting was scheduled for 0700 in Conference Room B, the claustrophobic box where careers were made or broken behind closed doors. Elise arrived 15 minutes early, her personnel file and documentation neatly organized in a leather portfolio, her uniform pressed to regulation perfection. She'd barely slept, but her eyes were clear and focused as she arranged her evidence on the conference table. Colonel Hammond entered at precisely 0700, followed by Major Grayson and Major Foster. Elise's pulse quickened. This wasn't a standard personnel review. This was a coordinated effort to eliminate a perceived threat. "Captain Blackwood," Hammond began without preamble, remaining standing to emphasize his authority. "It has come to my attention that you've been engaging in unauthorized communications with personnel outside this command structure. Specifically, you've been discussing operational details with individuals who lack proper clearance." Elise felt ice form in her veins. "Sir, I need to see the specific allegations." "Lieutenant Grayson, please read the charges." Grayson opened a folder with theatrical precision. On Monday, April 12, Captain Blackwood was observed discussing aerial insertion methods with non-combat personnel in the base gymnasium. On Wednesday, April 14, she accessed classified combat simulation software without proper authorization. On Friday, April 16, she attempted to override established flight protocols for the Eastern Corridor mission without consulting the chain of command. Elise maintained her composure despite the deliberate mischaracterization of events. Each charge was technically accurate but stripped of all context. The non-combat personnel in the gym was a visiting Air Force Special Operations Command pilot she'd been helping with local intelligence. The simulation software was available to all personnel with her clearance level for training purposes. The flight protocol adjustment was an emergency measure she'd suggested when intelligence indicated a high probability of ambush. "Sir," Elise said evenly, "I can provide context for each of these incidents that demonstrates they were within regulations and necessary for mission success." "Context doesn't change the facts, Blackwood," Hammond interrupted. "You've been operating outside your authority. You've been acting like you belong in combat roles that you're not qualified to perform. It's time you accept reality." Elise looked at the three faces across from her. Foster appeared uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Grayson looked triumphant. Hammond had the expression of a man who believed victory was already secured. "What reality is that, sir? That you're a 34-year-old support officer who will never see combat again? That all your little fantasies about being a fighter pilot, about being on the front lines are delusions? You're not combat material, Blackwood. You're too weak physically and mentally to handle the real fight." The words hit Elise like physical blows. She'd heard variations of this assessment throughout her career, but hearing it stated so bluntly in an official setting made it more devastating. Furthermore, Hammond continued, "I am recommending immediate transfer to a stateside training position where your unauthorized activities won't compromise operational security. Somewhere your physical limitations won't endanger actual pilots." Elise stared at the table, her vision momentarily blurring. 5 years of exemplary service, 5 years of exceeding every standard, 5 years of proving herself daily. And it came down to this moment in a sterile room with 3 people who had already determined her fate based on preconceptions rather than performance. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Hammond asked, the question purely procedural. Elise looked up at him, and for the first time in 5 years, she allowed him to see exactly what she was thinking. "Yes, sir, I do." She reached into her portfolio and extracted a single sheet of paper with official letterhead. "This is my formal transfer request to Joint Special Operations Command, effective immediately. I submitted it to General Winters yesterday afternoon." Hammond's face drained of color. "You can't do that." "I can, sir, and I did." Elise stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "While you were building your case against me, I was building my case for me. Every combat qualification I completed, every advanced tactical certification I earned, every commendation from field operators who valued my contributions. All of it went into my JSOC application." Grayson leaned forward. "You can't just transfer to special operations. That's not how it works." Elise turned to him with a composed smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, Major, that's precisely how it works. When you have the qualifications they need and the recommendations they respect." She placed another document on the table. "This is my acceptance letter from Colonel Sarah Reynolds of JSOC. I report to Nellis on Monday for final qualification assessment." Hammond snatched the letter, scanning it rapidly. "This can't be legitimate." "I assure you it is, sir. Joint Special Operations Command is particularly interested in pilots who are also qualified in advanced electronic warfare operations, especially ones who've maintained their training while coordinating complex intelligence analyses." Elise gathered her documentation and moved toward the door. "Oh, and Colonel, you might want to verify your facts before making accusations about unauthorized activities. Everything I did was within regulations, and I have the documentation to prove it." As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. "You were right about one thing, sir. I was never meant to be just an analyst. I was meant to fly. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving 3 very stunned people in a suddenly silent room. Elise's quarters had always been minimal, but now they resembled a tactical operations center. Flight manuals covered her desk. Her laptop displayed multiple windows of JSOC training protocols, and her bed was buried under equipment checklists and qualification records. She had 72 hours to prepare for the most important evaluation of her career. The phone rang at 0530 Friday morning. Elise answered immediately, expecting Colonel Reynolds with final instructions. Instead, she heard Chen's voice. "Blackwood, we need to talk now." 20 minutes later, Elise opened her door to find not just Chen, but Captain Wilson and Technical Sergeant Amara Nazari from the communications section. They had the unmistakable look of people engaged in something unauthorized. "What's happening, Chief?" Elise asked, stepping aside to let them enter. Chen surveyed her quarters, taking in the evidence of her preparations. "Damn, Elise, you really were ready all along." Words circulating throughout the base, Wilson said, his usual cockiness replaced by something resembling respect, about your transfer, about JSOC, about what happened in that meeting with Hammond. Nazari, who rarely spoke above a whisper, stepped forward. "Elise, I need to tell you something. Hammond tried to get me to falsify communications logs showing you accessed classified channels without authorization. He wanted me to backdate them to support his claims." Elise felt her stomach tighten. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to get lost," Nazari said with unexpected firmness. "But Elise, he's not finished. He's calling in favors, trying to get people to corroborate his accusations. He's scared." "Scared of what?" Chen sat heavily on the only chair in the room. "He's scared that you're going to expose him for the fraud he is. Think about it. If you succeed with JSOC, if you actually become a combat pilot again, it proves that every time he's dismissed female aviators as too weak for combat roles, he was wrong. And if he was wrong about you, what else has he been wrong about?" Elise sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. "So what do I do?" "You passed that assessment," Wilson said firmly. "You become the pilot you were meant to be, and you prove that judgment based on preconceptions rather than performance is a liability in the air. But what if I'm not ready? What if all my training isn't enough?" Nazari pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "These are the real after-action reports from the Eastern Theater for the past 2 years. The ones that show how many times Hammond's tactical genius nearly got pilots killed and how many times your intelligence analysis and electronic warfare coordination saved missions that were falling apart." Elise stared at the flash drive. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because if Hammond tries to sabotage your JSOC transfer, you'll need leverage," Chen said. "And because we've all seen what happens when good officers stay quiet about bad leadership." That afternoon, Elise drove to a small private airstrip outside the base perimeter. She'd been coming here for 18 months, training with retired Thunderbirds pilot Marcus Reyes. Reyes had seen combat on 4 continents during his 25-year career, and he'd become Elise's mentor in aerial tactics that went far beyond what standard training covered. "So," Reyes said as they walked toward the hangar where they kept the modified T-38 trainer, "Monday is the big day." "I'm terrified," Elise admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you honest. But Elise, I've trained hundreds of pilots, and you have something rare. You have peripheral awareness. The way you process multiple threats simultaneously, the way you adapt to changing tactical environments, the way you think 3 moves ahead, that's not something you can teach. It's instinctive." They spent the next 3 hours running through advanced combat scenarios in the T-38, high-G maneuvers, complex evasive patterns, tactical decision-making with incomplete intelligence. Elise handled each challenge with the calm precision that had made her exceptional at intelligence work. "You know what your real advantage is," Reyes said as they performed post-flight checks afterward. "You've spent 5 years understanding how aerial combat works from the intelligence side. Most pilots know how to fly, but they don't really understand the full spectrum of what makes missions succeed or fail. Most flight leaders think intelligence is just about target coordinates and threat locations, Elise replied. They don't see how electronic warfare, signals intelligence, and psychological operations create the foundation for everything they do in the air. That evening, Elise sat at her small desk reviewing her JSOC acceptance letter for the 20th time. The official language was clinical and precise, but buried in the fourth paragraph was a line that made her pulse quicken whenever she read it. Upon successful completion of assessment, candidate will be assigned to specialized airstrike team focusing on high-value target elimination in denied access environments. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Reynolds. Colonel, this is Captain Blackwood. Elise, are you prepared for Monday? Yes, ma'am. But I need to ask something. If I pass the assessment, what happens to my current assignment? There was a brief silence. Your current commanding officer will be notified of your transfer to JSOC. Your new assignment will be classified, but I can tell you that you'll be working with some of the most elite pilots in the military. Elise felt a smile forming. Including some I've helped support from the intelligence side? Precisely. Elise, I want you to understand something. The position you're being considered for isn't just about flying skills. It's about being part of a team that operates beyond conventional boundaries, beyond traditional command structures. You'll be representing not just the Air Force, but the entire Joint Special Operations community. I understand, ma'am. Good. Get some rest. Monday starts early. Elise hung up and looked around her quarters one more time. In 72 hours, everything would change. She would either prove that 5 years of preparation had been worth it, or she would fail in the most public and definitive way possible. Either way, she'd finally know what she was truly capable of. Nellis Air Force Base at 0500 hours was a different universe than the intelligence center where Elise had spent the past 5 years. The flight line buzzed with activity as special operations crews conducted pre-dawn exercises and assessment groups prepared for the day's evaluations. Elise stood in the early morning darkness, her flight gear bag slung over her shoulder, watching pilots move with practiced efficiency through their pre-flight routines. This was the world she'd been preparing to rejoin, not as support staff, but as an equal. Captain Blackwood. Elise turned to see a compact woman in a flight suit approaching. The name tape read Major Santiago. That's me, ma'am. I'm your assessment officer today. I understand you've been working toward this opportunity for quite some time. Elise nodded, her throat suddenly dry despite the 2 cups of coffee she'd consumed during the 3-hour drive to Nellis. Before we begin, I want you to know that I've reviewed your file thoroughly. Your intelligence record is impressive, and your simulator scores are exceptional, but simulations and intelligence analysis aren't reality. Today, we're going to find out if you have what it takes to handle the real thing. They walked toward the flight line where a row of F-16s waited, their sleek profiles illuminated by the runway lights. Elise had studied the JSOC selection process meticulously, but seeing the actual aircraft made everything suddenly more concrete. We'll start with basic flight assessment, then move to tactical engagement, electronic warfare proficiency, and finally scenario-based evaluation, Santiago explained. Most candidates find the last part most challenging. It combines physical stress, G-force management, and complex problem-solving. The next 12 hours were the most grueling of Elise's life. The flight assessment pushed her to absolute limits. High-G maneuvers with full combat loadout, evasive patterns designed to test both physical endurance and spatial awareness, and aerial combat against experienced JSOC pilots. Elise's muscles burned and her lungs screamed for oxygen as the G-forces compressed her body during aggressive maneuvers, but she refused to quit. During the tactical assessment, she drew on her years of studying combat operations from the intelligence side. When presented with complex scenarios involving multiple variables, she demonstrated a holistic understanding that impressed even the veteran pilots conducting the evaluation. Most candidates approach these problems from a purely tactical perspective, Major Santiago noted as Elise completed a particularly challenging electronic warfare scenario. You're integrating signals intelligence, electronic countermeasures, and tactical considerations simultaneously. That's rare. It's how real operations work, ma'am. Everything's connected. The weapons qualification came next. Elise demonstrated proficiency with every targeting system they placed before her. Air-to-air, air-to-ground, electronic attack platforms. Years of private training with Reyes had given her muscle memory and precision that surprised the assessment team. "Where did you learn to fly like that, Blackwood?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Diaz, the head of the weapons assessment. "On my own time, sir. 5 years of it." As dusk fell, the final phase began. The scenario-based evaluation. Elise, already exhausted from the day's assessment, was inserted into a simulated hostile environment with minimal support and a complex strike mission. For the next 8 hours, she navigated the challenge, making critical decisions under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, and demonstrating the core qualities required for special operations flying. When she finally completed the scenario at 0200 hours, Major Santiago was waiting. "That's it, Blackwood. Assessment complete." "How did I do, ma'am?" Santiago studied her for a long moment. "Official results come tomorrow, but I'll tell you this. In 5 years of running assessments, I've rarely seen someone with your combination of tactical awareness and strategic thinking. Get some rest. You've earned it." Elise slept for 4 hours in a Spartan barracks room, her dreams filled with fragments of the day's challenges. At 0700, she reported to the administration building as instructed, her uniform fresh, but her body still aching from the previous day's ordeal. Colonel Reynolds was waiting in a small conference room, a folder open before her. "Captain Blackwood, please sit down." Elise sat, her back straight despite her exhaustion, her face neutral despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "I've reviewed your assessment results," Reynolds began, her expression unreadable. Major Santiago was quite thorough in her evaluation. Elise waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You've set several records in the tactical decision-making module. Your electronic warfare proficiency is in the top percentile. Your physical performance, while not record-setting, demonstrated the required endurance and resilience, and your performance in the scenario-based evaluation showed exactly the kind of adaptability we need." Reynolds closed the folder and looked directly at Elise. "Welcome to Joint Special Operations Command, Major Blackwood." Elise blinked. "Major?" "The promotion comes with the assignment." "Congratulations, Elise. You've earned it." As they discussed the details of her new assignment, Elise felt tears threatening. 5 years of preparation, 5 years of being told she wasn't qualified, 5 years of being dismissed as too weak for combat roles. And now she was exactly where she belonged, among the elite pilots she'd supported from the shadows. "When do I start, ma'am?" "Immediately. Your new squadron is already waiting to meet you. And Elise, they specifically requested you based on your intelligence work with their operations. They know exactly what you're capable of." The phone in Colonel Hammond's office started ringing at 0830 hours and didn't stop. Elise's transfer to JSOC had been confirmed through official channels, and word was spreading through Falcon Air Base like wildfire. The intelligence officer who'd been dismissed as too weak for combat had just qualified for one of the most elite combat units in the military. "Sir, you need to see this." Major Grayson burst into Hammond's office, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. He held up his tablet, displaying an official notification from Central Command. Effective immediately, Captain Elise Blackwood is transferred to Joint Special Operations Command under Operational Directive 33527. All material pertaining to Captain Blackwood's qualifications and performance evaluations are to be forwarded to Colonel Sarah Reynolds, JSOC Personnel Division. Hammond read the notification 3 times, his jaw tightening with each reading. "This proves nothing," he said finally. "Anyone can transfer to a support role in JSOC. That doesn't make her a combat pilot." "Sir," Grayson swallowed hard. "The transfer code 33527 designates specialized combat operations personnel. It's not a support role. And there's more." She's been promoted to major. The implications hit Hammond like a physical blow. If Elise had been accepted as a combat pilot and promoted in the process, it meant her qualifications had been validated at the highest levels. It meant everything he'd said about her being too weak for combat had been definitively refuted by the most elite fighting force in the military. "Get me General Winters on the phone," Hammond said quietly. His conversation with his superior was brief and uncomfortable. General Winters had already been contacted by JSOC confirming Elise's transfer and commending her exceptional performance during assessment. She'd also received several messages from other personnel at Falcon Air Base inquiring about the circumstances surrounding Elise's departure. "Richard," General Winters said, using Hammond's first name in a tone that indicated this was not a friendly conversation. "I need to understand what happened with Major Blackwood." JSOC marked her transfer as urgent and mentioned she'd been operating under adverse conditions at her previous assignment. Hammond felt sweat forming on his forehead. "Ma'am, I was simply maintaining unit discipline and ensuring proper role assignment based on demonstrated capabilities. I've been reviewing the documentation you submitted regarding Blackwood's performance issues. Interesting reading. You claim she was insubordinate and exceeded her authority, but I've also been examining her actual performance records. 5 years of superior ratings, multiple commendations, and not a single disciplinary action until this sudden flurry of complaints from you." "Ma'am, her recent behavior," Winters interrupted, "appears to have been preparation for a JSOC assignment that she obtained through her own qualifications and initiative. An assignment that reflects exceptionally well on this command and on the Air Force as a whole. Unless there's something you're not telling me." Hammond realized he was trapped. Any attempt to further discredit Elise would now appear like deliberate obstruction of a valuable military asset. "No, ma'am. I may have misinterpreted the scope of her activities." "I see. Well, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your personnel management approach. My office, 1 hour." After hanging up, Hammond sat at his desk, staring at the wall. Within the span of a few hours, his carefully constructed narrative about Elise's inadequacies had disintegrated. Worse, he was beginning to realize that several people on the base had been documenting his treatment of her, and those records would not present him in a favorable light. Meanwhile, at Nellis Air Force Base, Elise was completing her final briefing as a newly minted JSOC pilot. Colonel Reynolds handed her a folder containing her new assignment details. "You'll be stationed with Task Force Raptor at our forward operating base in the Persian Gulf," Reynolds explained. "Your squadron specializes in high-value target elimination in denied access territory. You'll be conducting everything from intelligence gathering to direct action missions, working with operators from across the special operations community." Elise reviewed the assignment details, hardly believing what she was reading. "Ma'am, this is exactly what I've been training for." "I know. Your background in intelligence gives you a unique perspective on special operations flying. You understand the entire operational spectrum from intelligence to execution. That's precisely what we need for these complex missions. What about my previous assignment, Colonel Hammond?" Reynolds' expression hardened slightly. "Your former commander is currently having a conversation with his superior about his personnel management practices. I suspect he's learning that talented officers don't materialize out of nowhere. They're developed through proper leadership and support. When you try to suppress talent instead of nurturing it, you end up losing valuable assets to organizations that know how to recognize potential." Elise felt a mixture of satisfaction and regret. She'd achieved her goal, but at the cost of burning bridges with her former unit. "I hope I didn't cause too much trouble." "Elise, you didn't cause trouble. You revealed trouble that already existed. There's a difference." That afternoon, Elise received a call from Chen. "Elise, I just wanted to tell you that the entire intelligence staff watched Colonel Hammond get called into General Winters' office today. The meeting lasted 3 hours. He came out looking like he'd been through a dogfight and lost badly. How's everyone taking the news?" "Mixed reactions. The people who actually worked with you are proud as hell. the people who dismissed you are suddenly reviewing their assessment criteria. Let's just say that Hammond is having a very bad day. Word is that General Winters is conducting a full review of his command decisions. Elise felt a pang of guilt. I never wanted to hurt anyone's career. Elise, you didn't hurt anyone's career. You saved your own. And you showed a lot of people on this base that excellence doesn't always look like what they expect. You've got intelligence analysts now asking about flight training, communications techs inquiring about operator qualifications. You've inspired people. I just wanted to fly. I know. But sometimes when you reach for what you want, you show other people what's possible for them, too. That's not a bad thing. After ending the call, Elise walked to the window of her temporary quarters at Nellis AFB. Tomorrow, she would fly to her new assignment. She'd be working with some of the most elite pilots in the military, conducting missions that would test every skill she developed over the past 5 years. But tonight, she was thinking about the invisible people at bases around the world, the intelligence officers, logistics coordinators, and communications technicians who kept everything running while others took the glory. She hoped her story would reach some of them, and that they'd understand that being underestimated could be leveraged if you used it correctly. Elise had spent 5 years learning to be invisible within the system. Now she was ready to show the world exactly what invisible people could accomplish when they finally stepped into the light. 2 weeks after Elise's transfer to JSOC, the investigation into Colonel Hammond's leadership practices was complete. The briefing room at Falcon Air Base was filled with personnel from across the base, everyone from senior officers to junior enlisted, all summoned to hear the findings of General Winters' review. Elise wasn't there, of course. She was 7,000 miles away at the JSOC Forward Operating Base in the Persian Gulf, preparing for her first official mission as a combat pilot. But her presence was felt in every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that had been gathered about her treatment. The review has revealed several concerning patterns, General Winters announced to the assembled group. First, we found evidence of discriminatory practices in assignment and advancement opportunities. Second, there were multiple instances of retaliation against personnel who questioned established procedures. Third, and most troubling, we found evidence of deliberate suppression of personnel advancement based on gender bias rather than performance metrics. Master Sergeant Chen sat in the front row, watching Colonel Hammond's face grow increasingly pale with each revelation. Next to him, Technical Sergeant Nazari held a tablet containing the records that had helped build the case against Hammond's leadership. The most egregious example, Winters continued, involves former Captain Elise Blackwood, now Major Blackwood of Joint Special Operations Command. Despite 5 years of exemplary service, advanced qualifications obtained through her own initiative, and performance metrics that exceeded many of our combat personnel, she was systematically excluded from advancement opportunities and subjected to increasing restrictions on her duties. Major Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. 2 weeks ago, he'd been part of Hammond's inner circle. Now he was realizing how his participation in Elise's humiliation appeared to the rest of the command. Furthermore, Winters said, her voice growing colder, when Major Blackwood attempted to pursue legitimate career advancement through proper channels, she was subjected to fabricated accusations, inappropriate security clearance restrictions, and what can only be described as a coordinated campaign designed to force her resignation. The room was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Everyone present had witnessed pieces of Elise's treatment, but hearing it presented systematically was damning. The irony, Winters continued, is that while Colonel Hammond was building a case to remove Blackwood from the Air Force entirely, she was being recruited by Joint Special Operations Command as one of the most promising pilot candidates they'd seen in years. Her performance during assessment was described as exceptional, and her background in intelligence and electronic warfare was considered invaluable for complex special operations missions. Captain Wilson raised his hand. "Ma'am, what is Major Blackwood's current status?" Winters consulted her notes. She's completed her initial integration phase and has been assigned to Task Force Raptor, responsible for high-value target elimination in denied access environments. 3 days ago, she successfully completed her first mission, a reconnaissance operation that required flying through heavily defended airspace under extreme conditions. Her squadron leader described her performance as flawless. A murmur ran through the room. The intelligence officer they'd known was now conducting classified combat missions with elite special operations teams. "The question before us," Winters said, "is how we ensure this kind of leadership failure doesn't happen again. We lost a valuable pilot, not because she wasn't qualified, but because her immediate supervisor couldn't see past his own preconceptions." She turned her attention directly to Hammond. "Colonel, you have two options. You can request immediate reassignment to a non-leadership position at another installation, or you can face formal disciplinary proceedings that will likely result in your separation from the Air Force. I'll give you 24 hours to decide." After the meeting, Chen found himself in the parking lot with several other NCOs who had worked closely with Elise. The mood was somber but satisfied. "I keep thinking about her last day here," Wilson said. "When she walked out of that meeting with her head held high, she knew something we didn't. She knew she was better than how she was being treated, and she did something about it." "Instead of just accepting it as the way things are," Nazari replied. Lieutenant Anna Martinez, who rarely spoke in group settings, surprised everyone with her next comment. "My sister's thinking about joining the Air Force. Last night I told her about Elise. I told her that's what happens when you work hard and don't let anyone tell you what you can't do because of who you are." Meanwhile, in the administration building, Hammond sat alone in his office, staring at his computer screen. He'd already begun typing his transfer request, knowing that fighting the charges would only make things worse. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and several of his former allies had provided statements supporting the investigation's findings. His phone buzzed with a message from Major Grayson. "Sir, I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened to Elise. I was wrong and I'm sorry." Similar messages had been arriving all day. People who had participated in Elise's marginalization were now distancing themselves, realizing how badly they'd misjudged the situation. The base that had once seemed unified under his leadership was now questioning everything he'd told them about combat readiness, qualifications, and who deserved respect. That evening, Chen received a video call from Elise herself. The connection was poor, the image grainy, but Elise's face was unmistakable, even in the dim light of what appeared to be a tactical operations center. "Chief, I heard about the investigation results. How's everyone handling it?" "Mixed feelings," Chen admitted. "People are happy you got what you deserved, but there's some guilt about not speaking up sooner." "No one should feel guilty," Elise said firmly. "Military hierarchy exists for a reason. People were following the chain of command. I don't blame anyone for that." "What about Hammond?" Elise was quiet for a moment. "I feel sorry for him, actually. He was so focused on maintaining traditional combat roles that he couldn't recognize talent when it was right in front of him. That's not just bad leadership. It's a tactical liability that puts missions at risk." "Any regrets about how things went down?" "Only one," Elise replied. "I wish I'd found the courage to fight back sooner. Maybe if I had, other qualified people wouldn't have been subjected to the same treatment." "Elise, you fought back at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, and you inspired a lot of people here to think differently about what's possible." After ending the call, Chen walked out to the flight line where he often found himself when he needed to think. A group of young officers were running pre-flight checks, including several female intelligence officers who'd been inspired by Elise's story. "Chief, is it true that Major Blackwood qualified for Task Force Raptor on her first attempt?" asked an intelligence specialist who'd recently started flight training. Chen smiled. "She did. And you know why? Because Elise Blackwood understood something that too many people forget. True combat readiness isn't just about physical strength or machismo. It's about tactical awareness, adaptability, and understanding the entire operational spectrum. She mastered those elements while everyone was focusing on what they thought she couldn't do." 3 months later, Elise sat in the briefing room at the classified JSOC facility in an undisclosed location in the Middle East. The room was filled with tension as Colonel Reynolds delivered the news that had just come through secure channels. As of 0600 local time, 3 high-ranking enemy generals have placed a bounty on Major Blackwood's head, Reynolds announced to the assembled team. $1 million, dead or alive. Elise felt the eyes of her squadron mates on her. In the 3 months since joining Task Force Raptor, she'd flown 17 combat missions, each more successful than the last. Her unique combination of electronic warfare expertise and combat flying had made her particularly effective at penetrating heavily defended airspace to strike high-value targets. Why me specifically? Elise asked, maintaining her composure despite the shock. Reynolds nodded to the intelligence officer, who brought up satellite imagery on the main display. Your last 3 missions have disrupted major operations planned by Generals Kazemi, Rashid, and Al-Farsi. The communications we've intercepted indicate they believe eliminating you will significantly degrade our operational capabilities. Captain Michael Torres, Elise's wingman for most missions, let out a low whistle. They've put a price on your head, Blackwood. That's when you know you're doing something right. Reynolds silenced the room with a gesture. This changes our operational parameters. Task Force Raptor will be grounded for 48 hours while we reassess security protocols. Major Blackwood will be temporarily reassigned to non-flight duties until, permission to speak, ma'am, Elise interrupted, standing from her seat. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Granted. With respect, taking me off flight status is exactly what they want. It achieves their objective without them having to fire a shot. Elise moved to the tactical display. Instead of backing down, I propose we use this to our advantage. The room was silent as Elise outlined her plan, a bold, high-risk operation that would turn the hunters into the hunted. Using herself as bait, she proposed a mission that would draw out the security forces of all 3 generals, creating an opportunity to strike at the leadership itself. That's suicide, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes objected. You'd be flying directly into their trap. No, sir, Elise countered. I'd be setting our trap. They're expecting us to become defensive, to change our patterns. They're not expecting us to come straight at them. Reynolds studied Elise for a long moment. What makes you think this will work? Because I spent 5 years studying how these generals operate. I know their protocols, their tendencies, their weaknesses. I was analyzing their patterns when everyone thought I was just a desk officer who couldn't handle combat. The planning session lasted 18 hours. What emerged was Operation Checkmate, a coordinated strike that would use Elise's apparent vulnerability as the centerpiece of an elaborate deception. While the enemy focused on the bounty, Task Force Raptor would execute their most ambitious mission yet. 3 days later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Elise sat in the cockpit of her F-35, running through final checks. The weight of the mission pressed down on her shoulders, but she'd never felt more focused, more certain of her capabilities. Raptor Lead, this is Control. You are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. Copy that, Control. Raptor Lead rolling. The mission unfolded exactly as planned, and then went completely off the rails. The initial phase worked perfectly, with Elise deliberately allowing herself to be detected, drawing enemy air defense assets away from their primary positions. The electronic warfare package she designed created false signatures that further confused the opposition. But as Elise pushed deeper into enemy territory, the unexpected occurred. General Kazemi, more paranoid than intelligence had indicated, had established a secondary air defense network that wasn't on any of their maps. Raptor Lead, new SAM sites detected at grid coordinates Alpha 39er. Abort mission. Repeat, abort mission. Elise's mind raced as warning indicators flashed across her cockpit displays. Surface-to-air missiles were acquiring lock, and her planned escape route was now compromised. In that critical moment, 5 years of intelligence work fused with her combat training. Negative on abort, Control. Implementing Contingency Echo. Contingency Echo wasn't in the official mission plan. It was something Elise had developed on her own, a high-risk maneuver that would use the terrain and the limitations of enemy radar systems to create an opportunity that shouldn't exist. Raptor 2 through 6, maintain mission profile. I'm creating a diversion. Elise pushed her F-35 into a steep dive, accelerating toward the valley floor. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to standard evasion tactics, that the enemy tracking systems momentarily lost lock. She skimmed just 50 feet above the rugged terrain, using the mountains to mask her approach to the previously unknown SAM sites. "What are you doing, Blackwood?" Colonel Reynolds' voice cut through the comm channel. "Neutralizing the threat, ma'am." With surgical precision, Elise targeted the newly discovered air defenses, using her remaining ordnance to clear a path for the rest of the strike package. The risk was enormous, flying directly into the teeth of the enemy's air defense network, but the alternative was mission failure and potential casualties among her squadron mates. SAM sites neutralized. Raptor 2 through 6, you have clear passage to primary targets. The rest of Task Force Raptor surged forward, their path now clear to the 3 command centers where Generals Kazemi, Rashid, and Al-Farsi were coordinating their forces. With the unexpected air defenses eliminated, the strike package delivered their payloads with devastating accuracy. Direct hits on all primary targets. Confirmed destruction of command and control facilities. Elise, now low on fuel and with warning lights illuminating her cockpit, plotted her extraction route. She'd pushed her aircraft to the absolute limits of its performance envelope, straining both machine and pilot. "Raptor lead, what's your status?" Reynolds' voice was tight with concern. "Fuel critical. Multiple systems damaged. But still flying." The return flight was a masterclass in aircraft management. Elise nursing her damaged F-35 through enemy airspace, using every trick she'd learned in 5 years of studying aerial combat from the intelligence side. She landed with less than 2 minutes of fuel remaining, her aircraft scorched and damaged, but intact, just like its pilot. As Elise climbed down from the cockpit, the entire squadron was waiting. Colonel Reynolds stepped forward, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "That was either the most brilliant piece of combat flying I've ever witnessed or the most reckless," she said. "Possibly both." Elise removed her helmet, exhaustion etched across her features. "Did we get them?" Reynolds nodded slowly. "Preliminary intelligence confirms that all 3 primary targets were neutralized. Generals Kazemi, Rashid, and Al-Farsi were killed in the strikes." A cheer erupted from the assembled pilots and ground crew. The 3 generals who had placed a bounty on Elise's head had instead paid with their own lives, their coordination center destroyed by the very pilot they'd targeted. "How did you know that maneuver would work?" Reynolds asked later, as the medical team checked Elise for injuries. "That wasn't in any training manual I've ever read. 5 years ago, I analyzed a failed mission where we lost 2 aircraft to a similar defense network," Elise explained. "Everyone focused on the technical failure, but I saw a pattern in the radar coverage. There was a blind spot, small, but exploitable if you had the right approach vector and timing. I filed the report, but no one paid attention to the intelligence officer suggesting combat tactics." Reynolds shook her head in amazement. "So you remembered a theoretical vulnerability you identified 5 years ago and exploited it in real time under combat conditions? When people underestimate you for years, you learn to see things they miss," Elise replied simply. "Being invisible has its advantages." The mission that became known as Blackwood's response transformed not just Elise's career, but military doctrine itself. The integration of intelligence analysis with direct combat operations became a cornerstone of special operations planning. Elise's approach, using deep knowledge of enemy patterns combined with unconventional tactical execution, rewrote the rulebook for high-risk strikes against hardened targets. 6 months after Operation Checkmate, Elise stood before a new class of pilots at the Air Force Special Operations School. Among them were several women who had been inspired by her story to pursue combat roles despite institutional barriers. "The most dangerous weapon in warfare isn't the technology or the firepower," she told them. "It's the assumption that you know what your opponent is capable of. The enemy generals put a bounty on my head because they saw me as a threat, but they still underestimated me, just as my own commanding officers once did. That blind spot was their ultimate weakness." A young lieutenant raised her hand. Major Blackwood, what would you say to someone facing the same barriers you did? Elise smiled. I'd tell them that the people who underestimate you are handing you your greatest advantage. Study harder. Train longer. Know your craft better than anyone else. And when the moment comes to show what you can do, make it count. As the lecture concluded, Elise received an alert on her secure tablet. Another mission. Another impossible target. Another chance to prove that the best response to being underestimated was excellence that couldn't be denied. Later that evening, as Elise prepared for her next deployment, she received a message from Chen back at Falcon Air Base. The changes you started are still rippling outward. 3 female intelligence officers just qualified for combat pilot training. They all cited you as their inspiration. Elise smiled as she packed her flight gear. Her personal journey had never been about proving others wrong, it had been about proving herself right. About claiming the role she knew she deserved. Yet somehow, in fighting for herself, she'd cleared a path for others to follow. The next morning, as she climbed into the cockpit of her F-35 for another classified mission, Elise thought about how far she'd come from that desk in the corner of the intelligence center. The people who had once called her too weak for combat now studied her tactics in military academies. The generals who had put a bounty on her head were now cautionary tales about the danger of underestimating your adversary. As her engines roared to life, Elise felt a profound sense of being exactly where she belonged, not because anyone had given her permission, but because she had refused to accept limitations that existed only in other people's minds. Raptor lead, you are cleared for takeoff. Elise pushed the throttle forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as her aircraft accelerated down the runway. In that moment of becoming airborne, breaking free from the Earth's constraints, she embodied the lesson that had defined her career. True strength isn't about conforming to others' expectations, it's about having the courage to defy them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.